On the record, in the matter of the people of the state of Michigan versus Stanley Grott, Timothy King, and Kent Vanderwood. File numbers 23-02213, 23-02216, and 23-02224. Council appearances, please.
Good morning, LaDonna Logan on behalf of the people, P69715.
Good morning, Your Honor. Kayla Crino appearing on behalf of the people.
Morning, Judge Vera Kolchinsky on behalf of the defendant Stanley Grote.
Your Honor, Mike Smith appearing on behalf of Timothy King.
Morning, Your Honor. Michael Bogle and Brian Lennon on behalf of the defendant Kent Vanderwood seated here close to us, the first row of the gallery.
Mr. Vanderwood?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Mr. King's on Zoom, Your Honor.
Why?
And I wanted to indicate to the court over the weekend, he gave me a document. He was very, very ill. His leg is, I don't know if I can show the court. He waives his appearance of being here. I can communicate to him through the telephone, and I wish him continue the appeal.
He's not at the hospital though, correct? Not hospitalized.
No, he's not here.
He just chose not to appear without getting prior approval from the court.
No, on the weekend, Your Honor, I can just advocate for him. On the weekend, he was feeling very ill. He was texting me, and that's why I didn't have time to contact the court. So, you know, it is what it is, Judge. I apologize for Mr. King, but he has been pretty sick in the last 2 weeks. We thought he could make it here today, but told me on Saturday that he couldn't.
And then Mr. Grott?
He's here, Judge, right behind you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Sorry, Judge.
No problem. I couldn't see him behind you. Okay.
I didn't think I was that big.
Well, he was sitting down
I got
and
it.
I couldn't see him.
understand.
When he stood up, I could see him.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Let's see. We have 3 remaining defendants in this matter that we're going to begin the exam for today. I do see one here, people's notice of intent to admit virtual testimony pursuant to MTL 766.11, which has been filed in the iterations of the co-defendant examinations on this. I don't think this is any different from that, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any other matters that we should address before we begin taking testimony?
Yes, Your Honor. Brian Lennon on behalf of Mayor Kent Vanderwood. First of all, Your Honor, will we be able to unplug or turn off this fan?
You can turn it off.
Okay, thank you.
There's a, yep, I'm gonna say.
Thank you. The second is we filed a motion asking for waiver of appearance for Mayor Vanderwood. He, as we stated in the motion, he is diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. He has treatment scheduled for Wednesday of this week. Also, with his compromised immune system and other matters, priorities, we'd ask the court accept his waiver. The government's taking no position on waiver of appearance, that is. Filed with the court on Friday after we had received a word from Assistant Attorney General Logan that the government was taking no position.
I've not received it then.
Yeah, the meeting was emailed. I could also go back to the office and print one out. We gave a proposed order as well.
Well, no, we don't file by emailing. So how did you file?
I think
Gotta file with the clerk's office if you are filing a motion.
yes. Well, I'd have to gin up my phone, but we do have that here, so I'm happy to go back and get a copy, make sure that it's filed, and have Mr. Vanderwood here until the court rules on that motion. That's why we wanted him to be here present for this. But he has, of course, you waive any kind of constitutional right as long as it's knowing, voluntary, or intelligent. If the court would allow me to inquire, I believe you would satisfy that burden here of the court by clear and convincing evidence, and then we could follow up with the paperwork.
Okay, you can talk to your client about it.
Thank you. Mr. Vanderwood, will you stand?
Yes.
you've read the motion to waive your appearance in all further district court proceedings, is that correct?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to adequately discuss it with myself and Mr. Boville?
Yes,
You know you have a constitutional right to be present. You're not giving up your right to confront witnesses, just your appearance at further district court proceedings, correct?
Yes.
And that is in part because of your stage 4 prostate cancer diagnosis
Yes.
and wrapping up the affairs of your wife who passed away in September.
Yes.
And so your waiver of your presence here in district court for further proceedings, is that being made voluntarily on your part?
Yes.
No threat of coercion or promise of any type of outcome, is that correct?
Correct.
So it's made intelligently, voluntarily, and knowingly?
Yes.
We hope that that would satisfy the courts, and then I know that, can't explain exactly how, whether we brought a copy over or just sent one to chambers, but I'll take care of that immediately, Your Honor, that written motion provided to the Attorney General's office with a proposed order for the court.
Okay, if you can file that with the clerk's office and get me, my staff a copy, a judge's copy, then I can review it. Your questions or inquiries of your clients noted on the record. As to consideration for waiver for his health, the court will take that into consideration. I cannot take into consideration a waiver because of the passing of his wife from a year ago.
In the motion, we just say that he's got other priorities, including his role as mayor, and that's all the basis. But
I understand that.
Get the motion.
I think there's number of people that also have priorities, and so just because he has an elected position does not make his priorities more important than anyone else's. This is a criminal proceeding. He's being charged with felonies. The court will take into consideration the concern about his health and his treatments to the extent that they could not be rescheduled. But other things, they can be worked around.
Maybe then, at least until the court is ruled, can I leave with Mayor Vanderwood taking my office, file the paperwork and stand by for the court's order? Is that?
No, we're starting the exam right now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
No problem. Any additional preliminary matters?
Nothing for the people, Your Honor.
Nothing on behalf of Stanley Grove.
Nothing on behalf of Mr. King.
You know, at this time, the people will call Mr. Jonathan Rader.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury. Have a seat. State your first and last name.
Jonathan Rader,
Spell them, please.
JONATHAN BRATER.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Right.
Where do you work, sir?
I work at the Michigan Department of State in the Bureau of Elections.
And in what capacity are you in the Bureau of Elections?
Director
How long have you been director?
since January 2020.
And what does the director of the Bureau of Elections do, sir?
I supervise the Bureau of Elections and its responsibilities on behalf of the Secretary of State. The Bureau of Elections enforces the Michigan election law, the Michigan Campaign Finance Act, the Michigan Lobby Registration Act, the new personal financial disclosure law, and other state and federal laws involving elections. In that capacity, when it comes to elections, we provide guidance and training for the municipal clerks, the 1,521 municipal clerks, and also the 83 county clerks who run our elections. And then we also maintain some statewide technology that we use to support the election, including the state qualified voter file, and also online voter registration and automatic voter registration.
And specifically referring to the 2020 general election, did you receive an email that brings us here today?
Yes.
Do you recall who you received the email from?
I received an email from the National Archives.
Do you recall when you received that email?
I don't remember the exact date.
Would the date be on the email?
Yes,
And when seeing the email refresh your memory?
yes.
Motion to approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
So I'm going to hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 2. I'm just going to draw your attention to the first page and ask if that refreshes your memory as to the date that you received the email.
Yes,
And what was that date, sir?
January 8th, 2021.
Okay, and who was the sender of that email?
Katerina Horska, who is from the National Archives.
And was there an attachment to that email?
Yes,
Okay, and looking at the additional 9 pages of that document, are you able to tell us if that was the attachment to the email you received from Ms. Horska?
yes.
People would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 2.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection.
People's to the minute. Now, when you received this email from Ms. Horska, what did you do, sir?
I contacted the Office of the Attorney General.
And why did you do that, sir?
It was an unusual thing to receive. This was a certificate, a document that was purporting to be a certificate of votes from the 2020 election for electors who were not actually elected.
And this was a document that you received from the National Archives?
Yes,
Now, you said this document purported to be a certificate of votes. What was it about this document that led you to the conclusion that it was in fact not a certificate of votes?
well, it was the certificate of votes referred to Donald Trump, the president, and these were the Republican electors. But in fact, Joe Biden had won the election, and the electors who had been elected and sent in the official certificate of votes were from the Democratic Party.
Now, in the state of Michigan, are there rules or laws that govern how we conduct elections?
Yes,
And were those laws applied as it related to the 2020 general election?
yes,
Your Honor, people would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 1 pursuant to the judicial notice, Michigan Rule of Evidence 202 is the election laws for the state of Michigan, starting with MCL 16841. And I do have a copy for the court.
You have no objection, provided we identify which laws. We go through the list first.
I can go through the list.
Yeah. Thank you.
First is MCL 168.41. 168.42 is the second. 168.43 is the third. 168.46 is the fourth. And this is not the amended version that was amended on February 13, 2024. This is the one that was in effect for the 2020 election. 168.47 is the fifth. 168.841 is the sixth. And the final one is 168.879.
I think you said 168.41 twice. The second from
I'm sorry.
last one was
I'm sorry, no, 168.841.
841. And then what was the last one? 168.87.
879.
Thank you.
Permission to publish the report?
That's it.
No objection.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
One is admitted.
Mr. Brader, when it comes to presidential elections, how are electors, I guess, nominated in the state of Michigan?
Well, the major parties will nominate their electors at state conventions, and at fall state conventions. Following that, the parties will nominate their electors, and then they will send to the Secretary of State the names of the electors who they nominate.
And in the state of Michigan for the 2020 state conventions, how many, I guess, nominees were selected?
Would have been 16.
And all parties would have sent a list to the Secretary of State with their nominees?
Yes.
Motion to approach, Your Honor.
Motion granted.
So I'm going to hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 9. Could you tell us what that document is, sir?
This is a certificate of the Republican presidential electors elected at the Michigan Republican State Convention in August 2020.
And that will be a document that was sent to and received by the Michigan Secretary of State.
Yes.
People move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 9.
No objection, Judge.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
People's lines admitted.
Thank you. Now, after nominees are selected at the respective state conventions, do these nominees have any duties prior to the general election?
No.
And how is it determined which party's nominees will actually deliver the state's electoral votes?
That's determined based on which party's candidate wins the election.
And by wins the election, does that mean majority of the votes?
Who gets the largest number of votes in the statewide presidential election?
And in the state of Michigan for the 2020 general election, which party received the majority of votes?
The Democratic Party nominee received the largest number of votes.
And is there a process that is triggered after the election to certify those votes?
Yes.
And how does that happen, sir?
Well, first, following election day and the reporting of the unofficial results, each of the 83 counties has a board of county canvassers, which is comprised of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So each county canvasses the results, verifies that the unofficial returns were correct based on the tabulator tapes that come out of the tabulators with the vote totals. The county board of canvassers and certify at the county level. Following that, the board of state canvassers meets, which is also comprised of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The board of state canvassers reviews the returns submitted by the county boards of canvassers and then certifies the results of the November election.
And as it relates to the 2020 general election, did the State Board of Canvassers meet in order to certify the election results?
Yes.
Commissioner to approach, Your Honor?
Yes, Mr. King? You need to stay awake.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 3. Could you tell us what that document is, sir?
This is the official canvass of votes for the Michigan presidential electors for the November 3rd, 2020 general election.
And did the State Board of Canvassers certify the 2020 election results?
Yes,
And you said there were 4 members of the board, is that correct?
yes,
Did all 4 vote to certify?
no.
How many of the 4 voted?
3 voted to certify and 1 abstained.
And does that in any way affect the certification of the votes?
No.
And does that document also give the date of the Board of Canvassers vote?
Yes,
And what date was that?
November 23rd, 2020.
People would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 3.
No objection, Judge.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
People's 3 is admitted.
And when the Board of Canvassers certified the votes for the state of Michigan, for which party did they certify Michigan's election?
For the presidential election, the Democratic Party.
Now, once the State Board of Canvassers certifies the vote, is there any way that a party that disagrees with the results can appeal?
Yes.
And how would they do that?
Well, a candidate who believed that the results were incorrect, the tabulation results are incorrect, could ask for a recount.
Your knowledge, was a recount requested for the 2020 general election results?
No.
How long does an aggrieved party have to make that request after certification?
I believe 48 hours after certification is the deadline.
And as far as the 2020 general election results for Michigan, do you recall the margin of victory between the top 2 parties?
Yes,
And what was that?
I believe it was approximately 154,000.
For the Democratic Party?
Yeah, in favor of the Democratic Party.
Now, after the Board of Canvassers certifies the votes, what happens next as far as the election process?
So pertaining to the presidential election, it triggers a recount period. At that point, also for the presidential election, the electors who are elected receive a certificate of election. Each of them receives one from the Board of State Canvassers. And also the state sends a certificate of ascertainment of the electors to the federal government.
And what is the certificate of ascertainment?
It's a certificate that indicates which electors, which party's electors received what basically won the election at the state level.
I'm gonna hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 4. Can you tell us what those are, sir?
These are the certificates of elections that were given to the electors who were elected in November 3rd, 2020 election.
And do those certificates have a date on them?
Yes.
What's the date?
November 23rd, 2020.
People would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 4.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
People's 4 is admitted.
Now, when an elector receives that certificate, does that trigger some responsibilities on the part of that elector?
Yes.
And what are those responsibilities?
They are to meet at the Electoral College cast their votes in the electoral college.
And when does that take place? Well, when did that take place in 2020?
I believe it was December 14, 2020,
And where does it take place?
in the state capitol building in the Senate chamber.
And you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 5. Could you tell us what that document is, sir?
This is a letter from the governor, Governor Whitmer, to the National Archives dated December 30th, 2020. It enclosed our amended certificates of ascertainment.
Does it also contain the original certificate of ascertainment?
Yes,
I'm sorry, Judge, I missed the date on that. I apologize.
You missed the date, can you repeat?
I'm
that?
sorry, December 30th, 2020.
December 30th.
So if I heard you correctly, there's a letter from the governor, an amended certificate of ascertainment, and the original certificate of ascertainment that's in People's Proposed Exhibit 5. Is that correct?
The document refers to two original amended certificates of ascertainment. Not sure whether this, so I'm not sure whether this letter included the previously submitted certificate of ascertainment, but it includes two original amended certificates of ascertainment.
And are those as it relates to the 2020 general election?
Yes,
People would move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 5.
No objection, Judge.
No objection, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
People's 5 minutes.
Now, you testified earlier that the certificate of ascertainment identifies which party won the popular vote for the state of Michigan. Was that correct?
yes,
And on Exhibit 5, does it in fact identify which party won the popular vote for the 2020 general election?
yes,
And which party was that?
the Democratic Party.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked as People's Proposed Exhibit 6. Can you tell us what that document is?
This is the certificate of votes for president and vice president for the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election.
How many signatures are on that document?
16.
We'll move to admit People's Proposed Exhibit 6.
I don't have any objection, Judge. Can we just have the witness identify the exhibit again? This logo showing me another exhibit when you did that. Sorry, Mr. Brader.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So this is the certificate of votes for president and vice president for the November 3rd, 2020 election.
Very good. Thank you.
No objection.
People's 6 is admitted.
Now, Exhibit 6, the certificate of votes, is that a public record?
Yes,
And once it's executed by the electors, what happens with that document?
copies of the document are sent to the Congress, and I believe also National Archives.
And is that either with or following the certificate of ascertainment?
It happens later in time in the certificate of ascertainment.
And you have a certificate of votes that does not correspond with your certificate of ascertainment?
No. The only thing I think of is if an elector is changed, that can be reflected in the certificate of votes, but other than that, no.
I hand you what have been marked as People's Proposed Exhibits 7 and 8, drawing your attention first to Proposed Exhibit 7. Could you tell us what that is, sir?
This is the certificate of ascertainment for the electors for president and vice president for the November 8th, 2016 election.
And like the exhibit 5 for the 2020 election, does the 2016 certificate of ascertainment identify which party won the popular vote in the state of Michigan?
Yes,
And does it identify that party's electors as who will deliver the electoral votes for the state of Michigan?
yes.
People would move to admit people's proposed exhibit 7.
No objection, Judge.
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Table 7 submitted.
According to the 2016 certificate of ascertainment, which party won the popular vote in the state of Michigan?
The Republican Party.
Drawing your attention to people's proposed exhibit 8, could you tell us what that is?
This is the certificate of votes for president and vice president for the November 8th, 2016 election.
And people would move to admit people's proposed exhibit 8.
I don't have any objection, Judge. I would just object as to any questions regarding the relevance of this. I'm not sure what 2016 has to do with 2020.
Your objections to relevance of the exhibit?
That's correct.
It provides context to the policy and procedure that's in place, and that is always in place. But
We're not objecting to that, Judge, so I mean, well, I'll leave it to the court to decide. I don't know that it's
Well,
relevant.
then, sounds like a stipulation. You're not objecting.
Right.
okay.
We'll, on behalf of the campaign, we'll object to all. I think we already have 2020 certified Democratic certificate of votes and ascertainment listing evidence, which shows the policy that Mr. Rader specified to. I'm not really sure.
Well, Your Honor, I think it's important to show that regardless of which party wins the vote, this is the process that is followed. And it also contrasts the process that was followed by the 2020 Republican electoral nominees.
Well, that's a different question, Judge. We'll stipulate that the policy was followed by the state in 2016 and 2020. Because that's what these questions really are addressing, not the individual parties.
I'm going to echo the objection relative to relevance. However, the court's going to make that decision on what belongs to it.
And I recognize that change your question a bit. Is that a changes to the question that you're gonna pose to him or just?
Well, I haven't asked him a question
He
about
said
it.
that, he said that's a different question, so that's us. I mean, as it relates to the reason why you have them bringing in this exhibit.
Well, I think there are multiple reasons why it's relevant. I have not asked the witness a question about the document yet. I've just moved towards admission so that I can ask him a question. But I do think it's relevant for the reasons previously stated.
Right, to show the process and how it should have been, I guess, or is historically followed, will admit people's 8 from the 2016 election. It was admitted in the other 2 iterations as well.
Thank you. Referring you back to the attachment in exhibit 2. Did the Michigan Department of State receive a copy of that document prior to the email from Ms. Horstman?
Not as far as I know.
And the certificate of ascertainment, as well as the certificate of vote, where are those supposed to be sent after execution?
The certificate of ascertainment is to be sent to the National Archives. The certificate of votes is to be sent, I believe, to the National Archives, the Congress, to the Secretary of State, and to the District Court, the Federal District Court for the Capitol. I believe those are the recipients.
Now, you previously testified that the document attached to Exhibit 2 purported to be a certificate of votes. Could that have ever been a legitimate certificate of votes for the 2020 election results in Michigan?
No.
Why not?
Well, primarily because the Republican Party electors were not elected in the November 2020 election.
And prior to December 14th, 2020, were Michigan's election results final?
Yes.
And what does that mean for the election results to be final?
Well, the results are official following the certification by the Board of State Canvassers. There is a recount period that, again, is triggered by certification. So if there is a recount that is conducted and the state results, then those results would be the official final results. But in any case, in this case, the recount did not be requested and the time period for doing that. And so the certified results are final.
And does the Michigan Department of State Board of Elections have any policies and procedures in place to ensure election results integrity?
The Bureau of Elections, yes.
And could you tell us about some of those?
Are you asking about the conduct of the election? I'm not totally sure.
Just ensuring that the results are what they purport to be.
In terms of the results that are received, the Bureau of Elections receives the official certified results from each of the 83 boards of county canvassers. So the Bureau reviews all of those certified results before providing them to the Board of State Canvassers. They're also compared to the unofficial results to verify that the results are correct.
We'll pass the witness, Your Honor. Permission to publish these minutes.
Objection.
Questions granted. You were not objecting to publishing the, I was confused about the lack of objection.
Not objecting.
Okay, cross-exam.
Thank you. I'm gonna direct your attention, Mr. Breeder. Actually, good morning. I'm Derek Wilchinski. I represent Mr. Grote. Do you know Mr. Grote?
Yes,
And how do you know him?
he's a clerk for Shelby Township.
Okay, have you met him before?
Yes, I believe so.
All right. With respect to the documents that Ms. Logan presented to you during this examination, none of them were presented by Mr. Grote himself, correct?
To me, no.
And none of them were emailed to anybody on any of the email chains with respect to the documents that you reviewed, correct?
None of them were emailed.
By Mr. Grote.
Not as far as I know.
Okay, and I think to be more specific, I believe Exhibit 2 is the only document that you reviewed that had an email as part of the exhibit, correct?
I believe so.
And Mr. Grote's not part of that email chain, correct?
That's correct.
All right, now, let's look at, Ms. Logan asked you a question regarding Exhibit 6, and I'll talk about that in a second, but she asked you if Exhibit 6, which was the certificate of votes for the 2020 election, whether that was a public record, and you said yes, correct?
Yeah.
All right, let's take a look at the attachment to Exhibit 2, which is the document that's central to this case. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes.
Okay. Exhibit 2 is not a public document, though, is it?
It's not an official document.
Okay.
I mean, it's a public document in the sense that it could potentially be FOIA, but not an official government record.
Okay, why could exhibit, well, let's identify this for a second. So we're talking about the same thing, or we know we're talking about the same thing. So Exhibit 2 starts out with, and you have to forgive me because he's got printed double-sided, and I hate that, but Exhibit 2, after the email, the attachment starts out with a memorandum, correct?
Yes.
That memorandum is not a public document, is it?
Again, it's not an official government document.
Okay, well, let's back up a second. When you used the phrase or agreed with Ms. Logan's question as to whether Exhibit 6 was a public document, how are you defining a public document? What's that? Public record, that's right. How are
Yeah.
you defining a public record?
So in the sense of public record, I would say it's an official record that's created, in accordance to law by a public body. When you said public document, I wasn't sure whether you meant that or something that members of the public would have the right to view under FOIA.
Okay, well, let's talk about this for a second. Your definition right now of an official record, where does that come from? A statute? You don't know off the top of your
I'm
head.
not sure there's a specific statute.
Okay,
Yeah.
you don't know if there's a specific regulation that defines the set of documents we looked at as a public record.
Well, there are provisions in the Michigan election law and in federal law regarding these specific documents and their creation, but I don't know if there's a document that describes or categorizes them as a public record specifically or expressly.
You would agree with me that Ms. Logan used the phrase public record as if it has some legal significance in this case, correct? You took it just as I did, that it had some legal significance?
Yeah.
You don't know, though, if there's a statute that actually defines the phrase public record.
Correct.
You are familiar in your job working for the Secretary of State that in different bodies of law, there's usually a preamble that contains definitions for use in that section, right?
Typically, yes.
The Michigan election laws that Ms. Logan presented to you at the beginning, they start with the 168. You remember those?
Yeah.
Have you reviewed them prior to today's hearing?
Some of them, yeah.
All right, none of those sections contain a definition section, do they?
Not as far as I can remember.
All right, and you're not aware if there's a Michigan statute, regulation, or case law interpreted by the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court that defines the certificate of the votes of the 2020 electors from Michigan, whether it was completed by the Republicans or the Democrats, as a public record.
I'm not aware of that.
You concluded earlier when Ms. Logan asked you if this document was a public record, specifically Exhibit 6, that it was a public record, just based on your training and experience in the Secretary of State's office, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
In other words, you thought, well, it has to be a public record because at some point we receive a copy.
That, and also it was created pursuant to the procedures that I understand to be required to create that document under state law.
Sure, based on your training and your experience,
Yes.
but not necessarily on anything with a legal backing to it, a case law, a statute, or a regulation.
Other than the statutes that apply to those documents, no.
Okay, with respect to the documents attached to Exhibit 2, you don't know if those documents are requestable, and I'm making up a word there, pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act.
I believe they would be, but I couldn't give you a definitive answer. to
And
that
why do
question.
you think they would be?
Well, it was a document that was received by myself in email. So
Okay,
those types of documents typically can be requested through FOIA unless there's some sort of exemption applied.
this document, after you received it, though, didn't get officially filed anywhere, right?
Not as far as I know.
It didn't get cataloged anywhere other than as a part of this case.
I'm not sure what the National Archives did with it, but other than that, no.
Right, and I agree with that. I'm just asking you as it relates to this case.
As far as I know, the state did not take any steps to treat that as an official record.
And the reason being, because like you answered when Ms. Logan asked you the question, you found that there was no legal significance to this document, correct?
Well, I did not see any basis to treat it as the official certificate of votes.
That's what I'm asking, right? So from your standpoint, with respect to the 2020 election, And as to who won the election, it held no significance for the Secretary of State's office.
I would agree with that.
Nobody could act upon this document and change the outcome of the 2020 election and give the votes to former President Trump as opposed to current President Biden, right?
As I read the law, no.
That process, by the time you received it and it was forwarded to you after January, at January 8th, this was already past the January 6th date where the Senate, I guess, confirmed the election, correct?
When I received it, yes, that's correct.
All right. And at that point, the process in Michigan had long since completed, correct?
The election results were final, yes.
They were fine, but I mean, when I say long since final, like more than a month final, or little less than a month final, right?
Yes.
Okay, now, let's go back a bit over here. You had indicated, you just testified to it, that the election results were final. What date were those results considered final in your mind?
Considered final on November 23rd, when the Board of State Canvassers certified, with the caveat that if a recount were requested, there would be a potential to update the results with new final result, but that did not in fact happen.
Under normal circumstances, that November 23rd date was the final date, right?
Correct.
These were not normal circumstances, as you can imagine, going back in time to 2020, correct?
Normal in what sense?
Well, you had a number of lawsuits that had been filed. In this case specifically, there were probably 3 or 4 different lawsuits contesting the counting of the votes. You're aware of that, correct?
There were lawsuits, various lawsuits contesting the results of the election.
Okay, and some of those lawsuits had been completed prior to December 14th, the day that the electors met, correct?
I'm not sure when they were all completed.
So you don't know one way or another if some of the lawsuits were completed before or after the December 14th date.
I believe there had been rulings in those cases, but I don't know if they were completed.
Now, I want to give you a hypothetical. Let's just assume for the sake of argument that in one of those lawsuits, votes were ordered by a federal district judge to be changed. Okay, you understand the premise of this?
Yes.
All right, and in that hypothetical, enough votes were changed. Let's say we were using the round number of about 150,000, right?
Yes.
Let's put this in a margin of error, and a federal judge said, my goodness, I've now noticed that 200 votes were double counted for former Vice President Biden. Are you with me so far?
200.
200,000, right? Right. Let's just say that that occurred, all right? What would have been the process then with respect to the election? Because now, under my hypothetical, President Trump would have received more votes than President Biden, correct?
Under your hypothetical, yes.
Okay, now, let's say for the sake of argument that this ruling came down December 12th of 2020, okay? What would have been the Secretary of State's position? What would have been your position as the director of the department with respect to how to handle the situation?
I think it would depend on the court order, but I would certainly need to consult with the Attorney General's office on that question because they provide the legal advice to the Department of State.
Okay, fair point, right? Now, let's say that the court ordered that the Secretary of State's office allocate 200,000 more votes to President Trump and subtract 200,000 votes from President Biden. What would have been your recommendation to the Secretary of State's office then? It's a very narrow hypothetical.
But again, my recommendation would be to consult with the Attorney General on how to implement that order.
Okay, what would you have recommended? Because you would agree with me that you have more immediate experience dealing with the day-to-day operations of your department than the Attorney General's office, correct? They would have been able to provide legal support, but they would have looked to you in terms of an opinion, right? A recommendation?
I would provide my perspective on the practice of elections and to the extent helpful, the provisions of the election laws, I understood them.
You would,
But again, the legal advice would come from the Department of Attorney General. not me.
and how many elections had you been involved in prior to 2020?
Prior to November 2020.
Right.
As director, I had been involved in a couple of
2016?
no, not as director of elections. no.
Okay. So this was your first election that you were involved in at the state level, correct?
First November, yes,
All right. You were aware of previous presidential elections, right?
yes,
And in 2016, we didn't have, Ms. Logan asked you questions about it for this purpose. We didn't have these unusual circumstances where lawsuits had been filed prior to the January 6th date where the Senate confirms the results of the election, correct?
I believe there were some lawsuits, and again, I was not here, but I believe there were some lawsuits in an attempted recount with respect to the 2016 election, but I don't know the specifics of all that.
2012, you're not aware of any lawsuits with respect to that election?
Not that I can remember.
All right, and I could take you back to each election, but where I'm going back to is in the 2000 election. You're familiar with that election, right? Between George Bush and Al Gore?
Yes,
And there were plenty of lawsuits in that election, correct?
yes,
And you're aware that in that election, the US Supreme Court stepped in and stopped the recounting of votes, correct?
in the state of Florida, yes.
And the reason that the US Supreme Court did that, I don't mean the legal reasons, there were equal protection grounds and some other legal matters. But the Supreme Court did that because they indicated that if they allowed the recount to continue in Florida, that the state would not, that the recount would not be finished in time to certify the election, correct? That's your understanding of the 2000 election, right?
I'm not sure that was the, I'm not sure specifically what the US Supreme Court's holding was in that case.
Does that sound right to you, though?
I believe there was also an equal protection issue involved in that case, but I don't.
That's
recall the
right.
detail.
Okay, that didn't play into your mind at all, though, in making the decisions in this case, correct? In order, what you reported and what you consulted with the Secretary of State or the AG's office?
No,
Okay, all right, now. You had testified earlier that you had contacted the Attorney General's office after receiving the email marked as Exhibit 2 from the National Archives, correct?
right.
Who did you talk with in the AG's office?
Heather Meingas,
Can you spell Ms. Meingast's last name for me?
Meingast.
And what did Ms. Meingast tell you when you contacted her?
Objection, hearsay.
Did you want to respond to the objection?
Yeah, Judge, she's a party opponent in this case, and I'm just, Ms. Meingast, and I'm not looking for the truth of the matter asserted. What I'm trying to get to here is where she sent Mr. Brader in terms of, well, let me ask it a different
She's a
way.
party opponent.
Well,
She's an assistant attorney general.
yeah, the AG's office has brought this case, Judge. So,
That's, the AG's not a party opponent.
no,
Objections are
fair,
ruled.
fair point. Okay.
I mean, it's objection sustained, sorry.
All right, all right, Mr. Brader, let me ask you this. Where were you directed after you spoke with Ms. Meingast?
I don't remember being directed anywhere specifically.
Did you, other than to forward Ms. Meingast's documents or to put this on her plate, did you have play any part in the process with the AG's office with respect to this investigation?
I believe at some point I received questions from the AG's office about the investigation.
But it was a minor role.
I think that's fair to say, yeah.
Okay. Now, let's go back to, I want to talk about this issue regarding the electors, and we can look at the election law if you want. But you had testified earlier that both parties, and in probably all parties in the state of Michigan, select the electors, their electors at their, you called it the fall convention, but it's really the August convention, right?
I believe in the election law, it's called the fall state convention.
Right, where I'm trying to get, so I don't want to get hung up on semantics with this. This is the convention that most parties have like in August.
Right, yeah.
Okay, and it, for some reason, we call it the fall convention, even though it's not actually in the fall, right?
I believe that's generally true, yes.
Okay, now I want to walk you through a few concepts with respect to these electors. These are individuals, you know the process that each party uses to select their electors.
Not in detail, no.
You don't know the process in 2020 that the Republican Party used to select their electors.
No, other than what was required in the election law.
All right, so let me set the stage two with some other foundational questions. You don't know if either the Republican or the Democratic Party in the state are public bodies, do you?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, and you don't know if in this case, if the Republican Party elected its electors.
I don't know how they were chosen under the party procedures.
Under Michigan election law, what is the title that these individuals hold prior to November 23rd? They're still called electors, aren't they?
They're names of electors that are certified, that are, I believe, certified by the parties to the Secretary of State.
Okay.
I don't know whether they are elsewhere described as electors.
You referred to them sometimes as electors during your testimony, and at other times not officially called electors until after November 23rd, correct?
I believe that's true, yeah.
Okay, and you don't know if officially under state law, they are given that designation prior to November 23rd or only after November 23rd?
In 2020, on November 23rd is the date at which they became elected electors. I don't know or if there is a consistent specific term that is applied to an individual who is certified to the state by a party as elector.
Right.
Prior to that.
Where I'm going with this is they're ascertained electors after November 23rd, correct?
In this case, yes.
Yeah, because the governor actually has to send in the certificate of ascertainment, right?
Yes.
And then there's a formal certification process that Ms. Logan covered with you, where they have those official forms that get sent in. Correct?
Yes.
All right, but prior to November 23rd and even prior to November 5th, there's no reason to believe that these individuals didn't think of themselves as electors for their particular party, correct?
I couldn't tell you how they thought of themselves.
I didn't ask you that though. What I'm asking you is under Michigan election law, under any state regulations or under any case laws you're familiar with it, there's no reason why these individuals could not think of themselves as electors prior to November 23rd, is there?
Well, I mean, again, I believe the election law refers to them as being certified as electors by the party. So to that extent, I can understand that.
Okay, and even after November 23rd, they still consider, there's no reason to think that under Michigan election law, they could not think of themselves as Republican electors, right? You understand the specific term I'm using?
Yes, but after November 23rd, we had electors who were elected at that point.
I agree, but I'm not asking you that question. What I'm asking you is this, they still remained Republican electors after November 23rd, right?
I think they could be described as that. Yeah.
And they could describe themselves as that if they so chose, correct?
Sure.
And there's nothing under the Michigan election law, all those statutes that Ms. Logan published to the court, there's nothing under those statutes that prevented them from doing it, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, now let's turn back to Exhibit 2. And again, this is fortunately, it's double-sided. What I want you to look at, do you have a copy up there? Okay, let me give you a copy here. And may I approach, Judge?
You know, just for the record, you all don't have to ask to approach.
I try to be polite, Judge.
No, just that's because of the size of the courtroom, it's not meaningful.
It's not a long walk, is it? There you go. Thanks. Yep. Okay, what I'd like you to do is this. Well, let me go over, I'm sorry, before you go to that, I wanted to go over a couple of concepts, okay? Under the Michigan election law, the way I read it, the way I understand it, the way I've seen it interpreted, my understanding is that Michigan follows the concept of faithful or faithless, depending on which side it is, electors. Do you understand that?
Generally, yes.
And just so that we're clear for the record and establish some foundation here, the electors have to follow the candidate from their party who gets the most votes, correct?
Yeah.
And they can't choose to follow somebody else, correct?
Not, they cannot choose to cast a ballot and be successful in doing that.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Let me be clear about this. So let's use for example, okay? In 2016, you had 16 Democratic electors, correct?
Yes,
By statute, they were all required to vote for Joe Biden. And if they didn't, they automatically had to quote unquote resign their positions, correct?
that's my understanding.
All right. In other words, you could cast another vote. You could choose to vote for, let's say, Senator Stabenow from Michigan. But if you did, you were automatically removed. You understand it to be that way, correct?
Essentially, yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, let's take a look at Exhibit 2 for a second. And I'm specifically going to refer to, it's this page here, which goes front and back. So let's take a look at this in and of itself. Okay, all right. Now, with respect to with respect to this document, you didn't see this document signed, right?
This page,
Well,
I'm sorry.
this document, the one I'm having you look at is 2 pages right here, okay, front and back. You didn't see anybody sign this document, right?
Correct, that's correct, yeah.
All right, and you didn't see anybody create page 1, which is this page to this document,
That's correct.
correct? Okay. And let's go through this from the top. So it starts out, it says certificate of voters from the 2020 election. See that? Oh, certificate of the votes of the 2020 elections.
Yes.
See that? Okay. And then it says, we the undersigned, being the duly elected and qualified electors for president and vice president of the United States of America from the state of Michigan, do hereby certify the following. You see that?
Yes.
All right. Now, with respect to what this document purports to do, tell me how you read it, what it actually purports.
Well, I think it's laid out in the 3 lettered paragraphs.
Okay?
I can read them if you'd like.
No, what I'm asking is for your interpretation of this document. Here, let me help you out with this. What this document does is it says that these Republican electors put 16 votes toward President Trump and 16 votes toward Vice Mike Pence, correct?
Vice President Pence, yes.
Vice President Pence, right? This document does not order anyone to do anything, correct?
That's correct.
The document is, as it is laid out, and based on what you had testified to earlier, that it had no legal effect. This document is nothing more than informational, correct?
I'm not sure I could say that.
Why not?
Well, I mean, it indicates that these individuals are duly elected,
Okay.
qualified electors. It says what they did. It says that they
Well, let me
cast their votes.
stop you there. So with respect to,
I would ask if the witness be allowed to finish his answer.
yeah, sorry, Judge, I didn't mean to cut.
Thank you. Continue.
So it says what they did, that they convened the Capitol, that they were assembled and organized, that they cast ballots for President for Donald J. Trump and for Vice President for Michael R. Pence,
Okay,
and that they they signed on to that. essentially.
Okay, you're essentially, I think, saying what I said earlier. There's nothing that orders, that this document does to order anybody to do anything, right?
I agree with that.
And based on what you had said earlier, there's no legal effect to this document, correct? Right?
I don't think I said there was no legal effect.
Okay, what legal effect could there possibly be to this document after the governor had ascertained the Democratic electors and that document, the ascertainment and the certificate of votes were sent to the National Archives? What legal effect could this document have?
I don't know what legal effects it could have.
Okay, all right. There were no legal effects that were the result of this document, correct? Let me ask it a different way. Nothing changed as a result of the National Archives or anybody else receiving this document, right?
I don't know if I can say that nothing changed.
Okay, tell me what changed,
Well, the National Archives received a document,
okay?
and then they had a document purporting to be from duly elected, qualified electors for president, vice president for the state of Michigan.
Okay. So what changed?
Well, they had received that document.
No, I understand that, but their receipt of that document ended up changing nothing about the 2020 election, right?
It did not change the outcome.
Right. Joe Biden was still president, right?
Yes,
Kamala Harris was vice president.
Yeah.
All right. So from that standpoint, nothing changed.
from that standpoint, yes, nothing.
The only thing that happened as a result of the National Archives receiving it is that they received it and forwarded it to you, right? You don't know that anything else happened with the National Archives that was different as a result of this.
I don't know what else happened.
All right. Now, let's take a look at this document for a second. It says, "We, the undersigned, being the duly elected and qualified electors for the president and the vice president." Tell me what's wrong with that statement. These were duly elected electors, weren't they, by their own party?
I don't understand your question.
Okay. When you started, you seemed to take issue you seem to take issue with the phrase that they were duly elected, correct?
Correct.
Right, there's nothing in this document that says they were duly elected, ascertained by the governor, and certified by the state of Michigan, is there?
It doesn't say ascertained by the governor or certified by the state of Michigan.
Right, okay, and so the phrase duly elected is accurate with respect to the fact that these were electors that were elected by their party, the Republican Party, correct?
I'm gonna object because I believe that calls for speculation as to what that phrase meant by the drafter.
No, Judge, I'm asking something different. I'm asking if the phrase duly elected has any legal significance considering what the witness had testified to earlier. So he testified.
So any significance to this witness, I guess is what you're asking? Or,
Significance with respect to what he's already testified to. So Ms. Logan put him on and asked him to go down the process in Michigan. And he talked about the ascertainment process and the certification of votes. What I'm asking him is if there's anything contrary to the election law by the phrase duly elected, considering that these were, he's agreed with this, that they were duly elected by the Republican Party in 2020.
but our objection was that it caused for speculation because he can't ascertain as to what the drafters
That's right.
intended. But my question to you, you're asking him what his,
That's right,
okay, well,
That's
you
right.
can answer about him,
right.
so the objection is overruled.
Okay, given what you had testified to earlier, and I covered it in the preamble to the previous question, there's nothing fundamentally incorrect about the phrase duly elected, considering that you've already testified and agreed that these were Republican electors elected by their party. Correct?
I don't know if that's correct,
Why not?
because I don't know if the phrase duly elected is an accurate description of what the party does with respect to selecting their electors and forwarding them to the Secretary of State.
So the answer is you just don't know, because you don't know enough about the process at the party level.
That's fair, yeah.
Okay, so hypothetically, presuming that the party elects their electors at the fall convention, which as we talked is misnamed because it's in August, there would be, if that's true, there's nothing fundamentally incorrect about the phrase duly elected being in the certificate.
Is duly elected.
Right,
I couldn't say that. I don't know.
why not?
Because I don't know what the, number one, I don't know what the phrasing at the party level is. And number two, duly elected on a certificate of votes in that context, the way I read that, it's saying duly elected in an election, in a state election in November.
Well, I understand that part of it, but what I'm saying is there's nothing fundamentally incorrect about these electors who were duly elected by their party, again, in my hypothetical, merely saying, we met in the Capitol, we submitted votes, and here are the results of our votes. There's nothing that precludes them under Michigan election law from doing that, is there?
I don't know a provision of the election law that prohibits someone saying that they were elected by their party.
Okay, I'm asking a different question though slightly, and it's important to differential. There is nothing in the Michigan election law that you've seen or read that prohibits electors from a given party. And it could be any party, the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, the Green Party. I'm sure I'm forgetting the Socialist Party. There's nothing that prohibits those electors from saying, we've met in the Capitol, we've decided to cast our vote, and here are the votes that we are putting forth for president and vice president.
I'm not aware of a provision that expressly prohibits that.
You're not aware of a provision that expressly allows it, but you're also not aware of a provision that expressly prohibits it, correct?
That's correct.
And part of the reason for this is largely with respect to Michigan election law and federal election law, because there's a federal component to this as well. We expect that things follow a certain form each time, that it's followed, that election results are turned in, that an ascertainment is given, and that a certification is given, and that just follows form, correct?
That's the process as it is supposed to play out.
And in this case, like we talked about earlier, the process was different because there were federal election lawsuits, like the 2000 election, although different in some respects, contesting the votes, correct?
I don't know why the process is different.
Well, I'm asking you, given the fact that you said you were aware of lawsuits that had been filed, given that you had lawsuits, prominent lawsuits that had been filed, this election cycle, the 2020 election cycle was fundamentally different, correct?
Fundamentally different from what? I don't understand.
From the elections in 2016, from 2012, from 2008. The only election that this was similar to in terms of its scope, in terms of its magnitude, in terms of the number of lawsuits that were filed that were in the news on a regular basis. The only one that I can think of in my lifetime that was this close was 2000, correct?
Well, the 2000 election was much closer than this one. I think in the margin of Florida, it's something like 500 votes.
538.
I'm sure, I certainly agree that there were a large number of lawsuits that were filed in this election relative to recent other presidential elections.
All I'm
I don't know if I
asking
could tell you whether it was fundamentally different.
okay. Just one moment, Your Honor, if you don't mind. I could have a minute with my client.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I don't have anything further, Judge.
I need to take a 10-minute recess.
Thank you, Judge.
No problem.
We off the record?
Yes, we're off the record.
Just one thing too, I'm not standing every time I make an objection. I'm assuming you're okay with that. I don't want to offend the court.
I'm fine.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, so you have 10 minutes. That was the point of the recess.
Thank you.
Your client is struggling to stay awake. He's gonna need to. You can be seated.
We took a chunk out of it already.
Okay, we're back on the record and cross-exam.
My name is Mike Smith. I represent Mr. King. One of the defendants in this case. I just have a few cross-examination questions for you. One, you described the process and procedure of the Board of State Canvassers to review the returns. Said in the certificate of the Board of State Canvassers, 3 voted for certification, 1 absentee. Is that correct?
Abstained, yes.
Abstain. Does that affect the certification process? Do you know?
No.
It does not.
Not as far as I can, not in any way I can think of.
Okay, is there a particular law that's in effect that says that you must have a unanimous vote, or is it a majority vote?
A majority is the requirement.
And where is that requirement from?
There are sections of the law that govern the Board of State Canvassers and how they make decisions. There's also some regulations. I don't know where this, I don't have the specific citation for the majority vote requirement.
What you're stating, to the best of your knowledge, and you're saying it's a legal requirement that you don't have to have unanimous vote.
Right.
And you're positive.
Yeah.
Is this a true statement that you cannot recognize a certification of votes without a certification of ascertainment?
As I understand it, certificate of ascertainment is required under federal law.
Correct. Not under state law, correct?
State law also refers to certificate of ascertainment, but in terms of receiving it, that's a question of federal law, as I understand it.
Right. So you would agree then that the Board of the Bureau of Elections, the state of Michigan, never was deceived by the certification of votes that were sent in by the Republican electors. Is that correct? Or allegedly sent in by the Republican electors?
I do not feel that I was deceived. I understand who the actual electors were.
Was there anyone that you called or spoke to that directed you to take the certification of votes and proceed with giving that to the AG's office for a criminal investigation?
No.
Isn't it true that you don't have any evidence that my client, Mr. King, created the certificate, the certification of votes? I believe it was exhibit number 2.
Other than the signature, no.
What do you mean by that, other than the signature?
All I know is that his name and signature are on there. I don't know anything else about his involvement.
So there's no evidence that he created that document, correct?
Correct, except to the extent you're talking about the signature.
No, I'm not talking about the signature. I'm just talking about the creation of that document. The document consists of 2 pages, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, that document that you received that contained 2 pages, the second page never references the first page, does
It says in witness whereof, which I understand to reference the first page, but it doesn't specifically say the first page.
it? No, in fact, the pages are not even paginated, are they? There's no numbers on these 2 pages to reflect page 1, page 2, right?
Not as far as I remember.
No, and page 1, there's no indication that there's a second page, is it?
On page 1, you're asking us,
On page 2, there's no indication that there's a page 1.
there's not.
Would you like to see it again?
No, I don't need to see it. So there's no specific reference to page 1, that's correct.
No. In fact, you just pointed out, sir, that it's stated in witness whereof. But it doesn't say in witness whereof of what, does it?
No, that seems like it'd be a redundant statement, but no.
Why would it be a redundant statement in your opinion?
Well, as I interpret the words in witness whereof, you're saying I'm witnessing this thing. And so in witness whereof is referring to what you are witnessing.
But this page, page number 2, is separate from page 1, correct?
Yes.
Okay. On page 2, as it pertains to my client, Timothy King, there is no representations on page 2.
Purposes of the record, that is page 4 of exhibit 2.
Page 4 of exhibit 2. I'll repeat the question, sir. There is no reference on page 4 of exhibit 2 of the signature, of the alleged signature of Timothy King, that represents or references anything at all, anything about this election, about anything. Is that a correct statement?
When I look at the page, I'm not, no, I don't have the whole thing memorized. Right, so there's nothing that specifically references the election on this page.
Or on that specific page, is there any fraudulent statements on this page? Yes or no?
I don't think I can answer that. I don't know.
Well, if you can't answer it, would you like to see the page again?
I can't tell you looking at one piece of paper whether a statement is or is not fraudulent.
Well, how do you know if Mr. King saw more than one page? Do you know whether or not he saw more than one page?
No.
So if you only saw one page, is there any fraudulent statement made by any of these people that's allegedly signed this document?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. That question has been asked and answered in its second iteration, actually calls for speculation.
Did you want to respond to the objection?
Sure, Your Honor. Never asked for speculation. I asked him on this document whether or not this page, this specific page, whether or not any of the electors or specifically as to Mr. King, was there any false or fraudulent representations?
So when she said he could not answer,
He said he could not answer it. Then that's when I asked him, would you like to see the document again?
correct?
And he did. And then
And
we
then-
were right in the middle of that when that objection happened.
No, there was another question about how
How do you know that
that your client didn't see another page. I thought there was another question about that.
Right, and he said he did not know.
He wouldn't know. That's the objection to the speculation. So I'm gonna
So
sustain. the
that's
objection.
your objection
Yes,
to that specific question.
that she said it caused the speculation and that you repeated the other question, the first question, and he's already said he doesn't know if he can answer that. So she's saying that he already answered that. And he asked. So the objections are sustained.
Thank you.
No, I don't have any further questions. One second.
I think he might have one.
Along the same lines that I was asking you a question about Mr. King. Is it true that you have no evidence that you are aware of that pages 3 and 4 of Exhibit 2 were ever presented to Mr. King, Mr. Grott, or Mr. Vanderwood together?
Can you repeat? Your voice was a little low. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Sir, there's no evidence that you are aware of that pages 3 and 4 of Exhibit 2 were ever presented to Mr. King, Mr. Grott, or Mr. Vanderwood together, correct?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how they're presented.
You don't have any evidence otherwise, is that correct?
Correct.
Of whether or not, or whether they were presented, correct?
I think that's asked and answered.
Just want to make sure that it's the right answer. He's given me the best answer that he can give.
But you asked the same question twice, so he's already answered.
With it a little bit different way, but do you have the same response to that
No.
question?
The objection is sustained.
Okay, no further questions, right?
Thank you.
Mayor, my name is Michael Vogel. I represent Mr. Vanderwood here in the courtroom with us today. Now, this is your third time testifying in a preliminary examination related to the electors for the Republican Party that is center these cases, correct?
Yeah.
And we glossed over it a little bit before. I want to just cover a bit more of your background. So you went to Columbia University for undergrad, correct?
Yeah.
And you have a Juris Doctorate in law degree at the University of Michigan Law School.
Right.
And now you are the director of Bureau of Elections for the Michigan Department of State. What did you do in between your time with the Michigan Department of State and when you graduated from law school?
Objection, relevance.
What's the relevance?
He testified significantly about election law, Your Honor, definitions from the statutes, that is his current job title. I think it's important for the court to understand that we work at election law policy exclusively since he graduated from law school. That's the only question.
Oh, well, that's more specific than what did he do between,
Well, I
A
didn't
certain
want to
period.
do too much, Your Honor. You
right?
know,
So
I'm trying
let's
to
be
be
more
respectful.
specific because I don't want to know all the things that he did between there.
No, all right, so I'll just ask you straight up, Your Honor. So, Mr. Brady, then you worked at the Brennan Center for Justice, is that correct?
Yeah.
And your job from 2011, when you graduated from law school, until you came back to Michigan in 2019, right, as the legal policy director of the Bureau. You served at the Brennan Center for Justice and specialized in election law policy.
I was, in 2019, I was the legal policy director for the Department of State, not the Bureau. I think it's fair to say that I specialize in election law and policy with the Department Center, yes.
All right, so then going back to prosecution exhibit number 2, the email and the attachment of this alternate certificate of votes. That came to you presumably because of your role as the director of the Bureau of Elections for the Michigan Department of State at the time, fair?
Yes,
And in your role as a director and someone who has specialized in election policy for the last, that would have been 9 years at that point, correct?
yes,
So Ivy League education, law degree, 9 years in election policy. Your testimony earlier on direct examination is that when you saw the document, which is the subject of this case, it struck you as unusual, correct?
Yeah.
And then you forwarded to the Attorney General's office because you really didn't know what to do with it or make it, fair?
I contacted the Attorney General's office. Yes, I mean, I think that's fair. I've not seen a document like that before, so it seemed logical to contact the Attorney General's office.
And so Mr. Grott's attorney was asking some questions earlier about that document. You don't know whether there's any significance to the term duly elected and nominated electors. Sorry. Yeah, being the duly elected qualified electors, that has no real significance as far as you know.
Well, I mean, as I said, I think duly elected has a meaning under the election law and the process for electors being elected in the November election. Beyond that, I don't know.
And that's where you're not really sure how it works within the party, the Michigan Republican Party specifically, or how they treat these folks, correct?
That's right.
And you did not know whether or not there was any issue with them within their party, asked by the Michigan Republican Party, maybe others, to sign this document or submit this document, just notifying that they would have voted for Donald Trump. You don't know if there's anything wrong with them doing that.
I don't know what under the party rules would have been correct or incorrect. Yeah.
I think I understand that something would have been wrong if my client, Ken Vanderwood, mailed this off or tried to publish it or took it to the Capitol, did any one of those things and tried to make sure that these votes were actually counted by someone, fair?
I think that's the subject of this case.
I guess you don't really know is what I'm getting at.
I can't give you the legal conclusion as to whether that was a crime.
That's fine. And so this happened 3 years ago. What have you done since then to figure out how we'll address this if this comes up at this election? If another alternate slate for a losing party tries to do something like this?
Objection, relevance.
You should not respond to the objection.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, the next question is going to be on, do you still not know the answer to that question? States now. But they're supposed to try to go to the witness and witness testimony.
Point of this hearing is to determine if crimes are committed and the defendants committed those crimes. So anything that happens almost 4 years later is not relevant.
Made the same argument in response to the 2016 certification of the election process, Your Honor. That was allowed to show what the proper process would look like. I think it's important to know what the director of the Bureau of Elections, the Michigan Department of State, would do about the situation that occurred 4 years after it already previously happened.
You say what the Bureau of Elections would do if what?
If this exact same scenario played out, if he got this email against, after the election this year, coming up in a month, he would do the exact same thing essentially, because he doesn't know what the proper answer is.
I'll join in the objection.
My objection? Deal.
Sorry, Judge, I'm joining in the response by brother counsel. My mistake.
I don't know how you join into the response. I mean, it's his question.
Right.
I don't know how you do that, but the objection is, your objection was to relevance,
Yes.
and you're trying to, since it goes to credibility.
Correct. And
I agree. Objections overruled.
So, Mr. Gray, I'm going to re-ask the question. This document that you received was attached to the email and prosecution exhibit 2. You received that in January of 2021 after the 2020 election. Now, if after this next election, which is less than a month away, as the Director of the Bureau of Elections, if you received a similar alternate slate of votes, you would still not know whether or not it carries any legal weight or any significance or really what to do with it, would you?
A couple questions there. So first of all, both state and federal law have been amended since the 2020 election. So it would be a slightly different, there's a slightly different process in place, both under state and federal law for submitting the certificate of ascertainment, certificate of votes, and the rules for federal government there too. Having said that, again, if I got a document that was unusual or was a departure from the requirements, I would again contact the Attorney General.
Let's talk about some of the things that made this unusual. First is that you knew in your role that the Democratic electors had already properly been elected to cast their votes to the Electoral College, correct?
Yeah.
That, and the governor knew that because there was a certificate of ascertainment attached to their certificate of votes, the Democratic electors, correct?
Yes.
And that was not attached to the document you received in prosecution exhibit 2.
Correct.
It did not have a certificate of ascertainment, and so therefore it carried no legal weight or authority, correct?
As I read it, it could not be counted under federal law, it could not be accepted under federal law.
And it certainly didn't defraud you or trip you up, right? It was just unusual. That's all it was.
I didn't think it was a actual certificate of votes.
Now, turning back to the 2020 election, you were asked on direct earlier, what types of ways could someone contest the certification of the election process? And you talked about recounts. I believe you previously testified about public meetings. Are there any other avenues for individuals after the election has occurred to contest those election results?
Yeah, well, if anybody thinks the election laws or other laws were not properly followed, they can always file a lawsuit in court.
And that happened in 2020, correct?
Yes.
And you're not positive, I believe you previously testified, some of those lawsuits had not yet been dismissed at the time, December 14th, when this document you received from NARA was executed, correct?
Right, I don't know all the statuses of those lawsuits. I think some may have been on appeal. I don't know the specific orders or the dates.
And you were involved, since you've been in that role, you've been involved in hundreds of lawsuits, fair. So we wouldn't expect you to know all of them, but it's a pretty common tactic, essentially, yes.
Yes.
Now, let's assume, I understand you're not 100% positive on the status of those cases at the time, but let's assume that some were still pending. That's consistent with the previous testimony. What then happens if after December 14th, which I believe previously explained as the safe harbor date, what happens then if a lawsuit is resolved, say 2 weeks later, or day after Christmas, and the judge does order you to do something? You say you have to look at the order. What are you going to do as the director of your election in that situation?
So I would need legal advice from the Department of Attorney General to implement an order. It would involve interpreting both state and federal law. So I would have to consult the Attorney General's office to implement that.
So nothing in your experience at the Brennan Center for Justice or previously with which department was it? The legal policy director?
Michigan Department of State.
Michigan Department of State. Okay. Nothing throughout that time would allow you to explain what is permissible, what could happen if that had occurred. The lawsuit had changed potentially the results of the election. I
could certainly form opinions on that, but I would need legal advice to implement that. And I also don't, I'm not the legal counsel for the Department of State, so I wouldn't be able to make those decisions unilaterally.
Is that the kind of issue that you would have looked at when you were at the Brennan Center for Justice? Were these type of policy issues that you would research and review and maybe waiting on law review articles, things like that?
I don't remember ever looking at an issue involving the electoral college or safe harbor during that time.
You did testify earlier that you recall at least vaguely for v. Bush or Bush v. Gore. Sorry, I'm not on cap.
I do recall that. I was not, I was in high school at the time, so I'm not a lawyer.
Wouldn't recall. Okay, but so you're generally aware that this is a legal theory that some constitutional experts believe is a valid avenue to contest the election results after the safe harbor deadline, is to submit a slate of alternate electors just in case a lawsuit is overturned, correct?
Objection, relevance, and compound.
Well, it's definitely a compound. Did you want to respond to the irrelevance objection?
Well, I think specific intent is really the biggest element of issue here, Your Honor, and that is that they had to be defendants, but they had to specifically intend to defraud someone. And if they were operating under the assumption, legal advice from the Trump campaign, Michigan Republican Party, and others, that this was a permissible way to contest the election results, then I think that is incredibly relevant to get from someone who's worked in election policy for years.
That assumes that's not evidence.
I don't even know that that was your actual question. I don't think he can answer that information. I think your question is about whether or not he was knowledgeable about this being a way for to properly attest the election results.
I probably didn't ask a great, I really hit that. But where I'm getting at is I asked earlier if there were different ways to contest election results in theory. You walk through something, including lawsuits. I could develop the issue a little bit more further if the court would prefer. Maybe that's all we need is just understand where it's coming from. But I think that it's relevant because if there is this general or lack of consensus, he's testified repeatedly that he doesn't really know what the proper thing to do here was. But he's worked in election policy for years and years. And I would like to know if he's aware that one of the other theories to contest an election is to run an alternate slate of electors while lawsuits are pending, just in case something happens after the safe harbor deadline.
I'll overrule the objection. I'll allow him to answer.
So, Mr. Ritter, I will clean that up for you. Terrible question. So it's fair to say then you're aware that there are different theories out there from constitutional scholars and other lawyers on how to contest an election and particularly deal with what happens after the safe harbor date, correct?
Yes.
And one of those theories is that a losing party who is taking issue with the election, when they approach that safe harbor deadline, they can submit or memorialize an alternate slate of electors just in case.
I'm aware of that theory.
Thing. So you're aware of that theory. Okay. Now, turning back to that, what kinds of complaints were you receiving as the director of the Bureau of Elections at the time during the 2020 election?
At which specific time?
Yeah, let's go. Let's just say after the election. I know there's a lot going on. So the votes are being counted. What types of complaints is your office receiving?
Well, we received a lot of public calls and emails complaining about the election. I think we got a lot of calls about Sharpies, complaining about Sharpies being used on ballots. That was a common one. There were complaints about the timing of the election results. There were complaints about the Antrim County unofficial result reporting error. There were complaints about the processing of absentee ballots in Detroit. There were complaints just generally about voting equipment, claims that it was like rigged. That's what I remember predominantly.
It's pretty good. It's a long list. I appreciate it. So those complaints were coming from the general populace, but you were probably also receiving complaints directly from the Trump campaign and Michigan Republican Party, right?
Well, we were sued. I don't know whether we got complaints submitted directly to us by political parties outside of either lawsuits or comments that were submitted to the Board of State Canvassers or the Board of State Canvassers meeting.
And for all of those lawsuits, do you remember my client Ken Vanderwood being involved a single time?
Not that I can remember.
As you understood, those were really coming from the Trump campaign, Michigan Republican Party, those types of connected individuals.
I think there were from other entities as well, but I don't remember one from.
So you have no knowledge of what he would know or not know about those lawsuits, only maybe that, like you, they were ongoing.
I would not know anything about what he knew about the lawsuit.
Okay. So I just got a few more questions for you. So essentially, the election results, at least as you and I might agree, were not in contest anymore. They've been certified, but ongoing, there were lawsuits filed and your office was receiving hundreds of complaints, if not thousands, correct?
I don't know the exact number, but yes.
And that's the type of thing that was being made very public. The Michigan Republican Party and the Trump campaign were giving out press releases, issuing statements to that effect, correct?
Yes.
And ultimately, the alternate slate of electors were asked by the Michigan Republican Party to come and sign maybe this document you received as an attachment to prosecution exhibit 2, correct?
Objection, lack of foundation.
I'll strike that. You're on, move on. That attachment, prosecution exhibit 2, did not contain a certificate of ascertainment, correct?
Correct.
And even if the certificate of vote had a certificate of ascertainment attached to it, you previously testified, they'd have to be identical, right? They had to match.
Under state and federal laws, I understand it, they would need to match, except that you can replace electors as needed.
But there wasn't a certificate of vote or a certificate of ascertainment attached to this alleged certificate of votes, correct?
Correct.
And you're not even sure, well, no, you know that document carried no legal authority or legal weight, correct?
Again, as I understand it, as I read it, it could not be accepted under federal law.
And so you certainly didn't accept it or do anything with it other than, hey, Attorney General's office, please take a look at this.
Yeah, I contacted the Attorney General's office when I received it. I don't remember taking additional steps. Again, I think I had previously mentioned, I also believe I spoke to the chief legal director of the Department of State.
What did you tell the chief legal officer of the Department of State?
I don't remember the specifics, what we talked about. But it was either a separate conversation or the same conversation with the Department Attorney General, is my guess. Just trying to determine what this document was.
Sort of just as part of their investigation. It's fair.
But at that point, as part of the initial review of the document, I don't know whether it was an investigation at that stage.
But from your review of the document and meeting with the Attorney General's office and the Department of State folks about it, you have no knowledge beyond just having seen that document, my client's signature on one of the pages, that he ever saw or reviewed that document?
Not beyond that, no.
In fact, you already remember the page numbers, his name only appears on a signature page, correct? That signature page doesn't have page numbers on it, so it could have been attached to any kind of document, as far as you know, right?
Yes.
And you testified earlier just now that really the only issue with this document would have been if it were used to attempt to have those votes actually counted, right? There's nothing inherently wrong as far as you know with just creating a document that says that they would do a certain thing, correct?
Yeah, and I'm gonna object. That goes to the whole reason we're here, whether or not this is a fraudulent document. I don't think you can answer that and draw a legal conclusion.
Already testified, Your Honor, that he doesn't know that there's any particular issue with Republican electors or any electors needing to memorialize their votes. He's also previously testified that there are competing legal theories out there about whether or not this is a permissible action to contest or preserve the issue while lawsuits are pending. I think it's already in evidence.
Then it would be an ask and answer.
Well, I think that might have been a good one, but no, Your Honor, this is going to, I'm gonna ask one more final question about the document, which is going to be the memorandum cover page to it, because this is what was actually mailed out. So I'm just introducing.
Repeat your last question.
My last question was, your testimony previously, earlier, was that having a slate of electors meet together and sign a document to memorialize what they would have done. There's not anything inherently wrong with that on election law, as far as you know.
That's not a question.
Probably better on second go around.
Okay, well, we'll go with that one. Do you have no, I'm assuming there's no objection to that question.
No,
We'll go with that question.
All right, Mr. Bader, so to testify, correct, that any electors could meet, and there's nothing inherently wrong under Michigan election law for them to memorialize what they would have done with their votes if they were elected, correct?
I don't think I said that specifically. What I said was, I wasn't aware of an express prohibition in the Michigan election law, somebody completing a document. And I said I didn't know what the party, the rules would be surrounding that language.
If you had received that document and it had not been submitted to NARA, would you have been so concerned about it?
I would have found it unusual. I guess I don't know what I could speculate as to what difference it would make whether it was sent to the National Archives.
So your testimony today as the director of the Bureau of Elections is that you don't know if it is significant at all whether or not this document was submitted to anyone, including the National Archives.
No, I think it's significant. I just can't tell you exactly how my reaction would have been different 4 years ago if I had gotten the document directly and without knowing whether it was sent to the National Archives.
Great, thank you for bearing with me. Did you ever review Special Agent Shock's affidavit that was submitted in this case and support the charges?
I don't remember.
Do you recall ever being asked to weigh in or provide an opinion given your role as someone who worked in election policy for years regarding any of the justifications for the charges in this case?
Not that I can remember.
No further questions.
Reader.
very briefly. I'm going to hand you the second page of People Exhibit 1. There is, the final sentence is highlighted. I'm going to ask you to read that, please.
That would highlight it first.
It's the first page you said?
Second page of Exhibit 1. It's MCL 168.42. Last sentence, please.
Highlighted sentence says, the candidates for electors of president and vice president who shall be considered elected are those whose names have been certified by the Secretary of State by that political party receiving the greatest number of votes for those offices at the next November election.
So after the 2020 general election, the electors elected would have been from the Democratic Party, is that correct?
Yes,
And looking at the attachment from Exhibit 2, are the persons claiming to be duly elected from the Democratic Party?
no,
Which party are they from?
the Republican Party.
And after the 2020 general election, according to MCL 168.42, am I correct in stating that only the Democratic electors had duties or responsibilities after the general election?
Yes,
Even with lawsuits pending, would the Republican candidates for electors have any legal authority to create a certificate of vote?
not that I'm aware of.
And in looking at the attachment from Exhibit 2, did you see any alternative language or contingent language that said if an order comes in or if asked to serve, we would deliver these votes?
No.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Just a quick follow-up, Judge. With respect to the question that Ms. Logan asked you earlier, whether there was any legal authority to for the Republican electors to create a certificate of vote, you're not aware of any legal authority that prohibited them from doing it, correct?
Other than the procedure that's laid out in state and federal law for the casting of votes in the electoral college.
Okay, that's not what Exhibit 2 purports to do, is it? Here, in other words, Exhibit 2 is labeled a certificate of vote, correct?
Believe so.
Okay, and that would have to be submitted with the ascertainment in order for the electors to actually go to the Capitol and add to the Electoral College in order to cast their votes.
For it to be accepted, yes.
Right, then my question was, I understand your answer to Ms. Logan's question that there's no legal authority to create the certificate of vote, but likewise, there's no prohibition on them doing it, correct?
There's no section of law that expressly prohibits it.
Thank you. Nothing further.
No further questions.
None here, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No.
Okay, Mr. Grader, you may be excused.
You know,
Call your next witness.
At this time, people will call Mr. Troy Hudson.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're going to give is the truth and the whole truth under penalty of perjury.
I do.
You can have a seat.
Good morning.
Morning, Lee Skillmore,
Can you state your name again, please?
Troy Hudson,
Okay, and in 2020, where did you work, sir?
at the Michigan Republican Party,
And how long have you worked for the Michigan Republican Party?
for just about 2 years.
All right, and in what capacity did you work for the Michigan Republican Party in 2020?
I was the political.
And what does the political political director do?
It varies by day, but largely I work on client relationships like our state committee, campaigns, working with the campaigns and candidates.
And are you limited to just state campaigns or?
No, some federal as well.
And after the general election in November of 2020, was there a meeting held at the Michigan Republican headquarters?
Yes,
First things first, where is the Michigan Republican headquarters located?
on Seymour Street. I don't know the exact address, but here in Lansing.
In the city of Lansing?
Yes.
Now, just referring to 2020, who has access to the headquarters?
Various people, but employees of the party, and then we had shared space with other campaigns.
Now, when you say employees of the party, is this just the Michigan Republican Party?
And the RNC, I don't know who was paid out of what pot, but that employees from the state party, RNC, other campaign.
And now, when you're both working out of the headquarters, are you just like sharing space, or are you actually working together all the time?
Mostly sharing space.
Now, on referring to the meeting, when did that meeting occur?
I don't know the exact.
I said December 14th, 2020. Would that sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Prior to the meeting actually taking place, what information did you have about the purpose of this meeting?
For gathering the people who were nominated for electors, as a mostly an honorary congratulations on having been elected that, and just congratulating them.
Okay, and who all was invited to this meeting?
Those that were nominated to be electors.
Were they allowed to bring guests?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, at the time we had a COVID breakout that week, and so we were limiting access from union staff.
So how were the candidates for electors notified about, attending this meeting?
I don't recall.
Do you know how many of the candidates who were actually nominated in August that actually attended the meeting?
I believe all but two.
And which two did not appear?
Terry Land and Gary Ball, I believe.
And I know we keep calling this a meeting. Was this like an official Robert's Rules meeting?
I don't know.
How would you describe it?
I mean, there were pastries and coffee and gathering celebration of that being nominated.
And other than the 14 candidates for elector, was there anyone else in attendance?
There were a few staff members in the building.
Who, if you recall?
Myself, Henrietta Coe, Sue Foster, Mike Ambrosini, Sean Flynn in the Trump campaign, and then there were a few other Trump employees or employees that don't remember who they were.
Now, did the 14 elector candidates, did they all arrive at the same time?
Around the same time.
And where did they go when they come inside of the headquarters?
Down to our basement conference room area
And did you go down to the basement as well?
on occasion.
So was it just the 14 electors there?
And then some staff on occasion too.
Or were replacement electors brought in?
There were two people who were there in the replacement of Terry Lynn Land.
And can you tell me how that came about?
I don't know.
Did you call?
No.
Do you know who did?
I know that Michelle Maddox was on the phone with people trying to get folks there. I don't know if she called them specifically.
Do you know who the replacements were?
Yes. I don't know who one of them was. I don't know who replaced Gary. But then Ken Thompson replaced Gary.
And do you know why it was important to have replacements for a celebratory meeting?
Again, I wasn't, no.
Was there any agenda for this meeting other than celebrating the candidates for being nominated.
There were ongoing lawsuits that I was made aware of. That electors had to meet. And so we had a document.
Okay, tell me about that document.
I'm sorry, Judge, the witness trail doc there was a document that, what?
That we had Kathy Burden sign saying if electors had, or if Trump and Pence had won, this is how they would have voted.
You just told me about the document.
Right.
Now, were you present when Ms. Burden signed that document?
No.
Do you know who created that document?
No.
How did that document get to the meeting?
I don't.
Do you remember having a meeting with Special Agent Shock in March of 2023?
Yes.
Do you remember telling Special Agent Shock that that document was emailed to you?
I know that yes, it was.
Do you recall who emailed that document to you?
I don't know if it was Laura Cox or Stu Sandler. One of those two.
Would you recognize that document if you saw it again?
Yes.
So I'm going to hand you what has been marked, well, will be marked as people's proposed exhibit 28. Do you recognize that document?
Yes.
What is that document, sir?
It looks like the document that we gave that was signed on that day.
You stated that the purpose of that document is to say, we're willing and able to serve. If necessary, we would have tendered votes for President Trump and Vice President Pence.
Yes, are available to me, perform their duties. Yes.
To your knowledge, was that document ever mailed to anyone?
Not that I'm aware of.
And you stated that the document was ultimately signed by Ms. Kathleen Burden, is that correct?
But yes,
Do you know what happened to the signed copy?
I do not.
And people were moved to admit people's proposed exhibit 28.
No.
No objection.
Now, this document, you'd agreed has one spot for one signature, correct?
Correct.
And the spot for notary.
Correct.
You would not have, would you have asked any other electors to sign that document as well?
I didn't ask anyone to sign.
You're saying you did not ask anyone to sign exhibit 28? Were you present when Ms. Burden signed that document?
No.
Do you know how that came about in the meeting?
No.
Should have published. Now, were you present when the meeting started?
I was in and out. I don't recall what parts of that.
About how long did the meeting last?
Not very long, maybe an hour. I guess that.
What happens after the meeting?
Some of the people from the Trump campaign came down and said we've got something else that we would like you to participate in.
Did you know anything about what that referenced?
No.
Okay. Did you stay for that portion?
I did not.
What did you do when that announcement was made?
I can't remember if it was Laura, Chairman Cox or Stu Sandlin, but I contacted one or both of them and asked and informed them that something else was happening and they told me to leave.
And did you leave?
Yes,
Do you know about what time you left?
late morning, mid-morning.
Now, on December 14th, 2020, did you know anything about another document?
No.
Now, I know you stated that you were in and out of the basement. Do you remember what, if anything, was going on in the basement when you were down there?
Just the people were gathered.
Like gathered, standing around, sitting? or-
I know we had chairs there that were distanced quite a bit, but I don't recall any specifics, no.
Is it fair to say that while you were down there, there was nothing formal about like, I guess, adhering to Robert's rules going on? When you were down there, was
I'm
anyone?
sorry, Judge, just, I want clarification from the witness. You're saying no, that nothing happened, or no, that you're not,
I do not recall.
you do not recall? Okay, good, thank you.
The
Sorry,
time,
Judge.
No problem.
no, the time that you were down there, was anyone speaking?
Not, I don't recall a specific.
Not speech, speaking.
I don't recall anybody.
You remember telling Special Agent Shock that Kathy Burden led the meeting?
That's possible. I don't know.
Nothing further.
Prosecutor.
One second, Judge. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Hudson. How are you doing today?
I'm here.
You're here. That's true. We're all here. I guess nobody can say this. Let's start at the end and work our way kind of backwards a little bit. This stuff's more fresh in your mind since you just testified to it. With respect to Ms. Logan's question as to whether people were speaking when you were at the meeting, is it fair to say the impression I got is that people were just kind of milling about the whole thing?
That's my recollection.
You didn't actually see anybody take control or take charge of the meeting?
No, not my recollection.
It's possible during a point in time in the meeting that Ms. Burden did speak, you just don't recall it as you sit here today.
Correct.
All right. You had also mentioned that after the meeting, there were people from the Trump campaign who came down and said that they had something else to do, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall who it was from the Trump campaign?
I remember Sean Flynn was there. There were others, but I don't remember their names or
Did
didn't
they-
know them.
Ever tell you what it is that they had to do? What was the something that they had to do?
No.
Were you ever given any sort of loose idea of what it is that they had to do?
No,
All right, how many people from the Trump campaign came down?
I believe it was two, but I don't recall.
So Sean Flynn and somebody else?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know, can you describe this other person at all? Older, younger, black, white? What?
I don't remember.
Okay. Are you familiar with my client Stan Grove?
I am.
And you're familiar with Mayor Vanderwood?
I am.
And you're familiar with Mr. King, who's up on the screen?
I believe we've met a time or two, but not well.
Okay, do you specifically recall the three of them being at this meeting?
Yes.
Okay, when I say specifically recall, I don't mean because the documents refreshed your recollection or that you watched or read something. You specifically recall today that the three of them were at this meeting.
I don't remember Mr. King's face, but I know that Ms. Scott and Mr. Vanderbilt were there. Yeah.
Okay, and how long do you recall Mr. Grott being at the meeting?
I don't remember that.
Do you recall what time the meeting started?
Early in the morning,
Like, let's say 9 o'clock?
something along those lines.
Right around those. Do you recall how close to the start of the meeting Mr. Grott appeared?
I do not.
Do you recall how close to the start of the meeting Mayor Vanderwood
I
appeared?
do not.
Do you recall, you said the meeting lasted less than an hour?
Something along those lines. It
All
wasn't, it wasn't a long meeting.
So sometimes, just to put a bracket on it, sometime between, say, 30 minutes and an hour.
Sure.
And nothing was produced after the meeting formally that you saw, correct?
Correct.
you were sent a copy of the declaration that's, I believe, Exhibit 28.
Yes.
Exhibit 28 at some point after the meeting.
It could have been before, I don't remember.
All right, do you have a copy of the email that was attached to it?
I have no idea.
All right, there's nothing illegal as far as you can see about this declaration, is there?
Not that I know of.
You don't know of any law that this violates in any way.
I'm not an attorney, I don't.
And to sort of summarize and to put into layperson's terms, that declaration just basically says, we're electors from the Republican Party. If called to, we would cast our votes for Trump and Pence.
Yes,
All right, you're familiar with the document, the certificate of vote that's the center of this case?
yes.
This was People's Exhibit 2, and I want to show you a copy of it. Mr. Hudson, I'm going to sneak around over here. Take a look at that. Other than the formal language of Exhibit 2, there is, in essence, nothing fundamentally different between that document and the declaration that's Exhibit 28, is there?
I'm gonna have to object because the exhibits speak for themselves.
I know, I'm asking for the
Well, I mean,
witnesses.
there's,
So there's an
they all
objection.
signed.
There's an objection. Let me rule on that first. Your objection is that,
I don't think this witness is qualified to answer that question, and the exhibits speak for themselves.
I don't know what either objection is. The witness is qualified to, under 601, MRE 601, to review the document and answer my question based on the review of the document, even in comparison. He has capacity in which to do that. Secondly, with regard to the documents speaking for themselves, we ask witnesses to read documents, interpret them all the time. I'm asking him for the consistency between Exhibit 28 and Exhibit 2.
One document which he has no familiarity with, you're basically putting him in the place of the trier of fact, which
You
is
said-
the court.
right, you said that he had the capacity. What is his capacity?
It's under MRE 601. All witnesses have the capacity to interpret what they're given, unless there's some sort of issue to prevent them from having that capacity. So for example, in insurance cases all the time, you can show somebody the insurance contract and ask them what the insurance contract says. And if you're comparing it to something, you'd ask them about the consistency. If it's terms in the insurance contract, they're allowed to give their interpretation of those terms. I'm not asking them to do this from an expert standpoint. So this is not somebody that under 701, 702, 703, I'm asking him to qualify as an expert. What I'm asking him to do is take a look at the document that he's been sent, which is Exhibit 28, and then compare that to Exhibit 2, which is a document that he said he's reviewed in the past and wanted to see a copy of here today, and ask if there's any fundamental differences in the substance of those documents. That's what I'm getting to.
That's the job of the court.
No, I don't think so, because this is a comparison between a document that he says that he was sent and a document that it was prepared at some other time, at a different time.
But he had no knowledge of the other. He's only saying that he's seen this document.
No, he
Right.
testified earlier that he has seen the other document. He asked me. for a
Here in
copy.
court.
Right, I understand.
He's not gonna compare though. That's the job of, I agree, that's the job of the court.
Okay,
He hasn't seen this document until it was shown to him in court. Is what his testimony was.
he's seen the signed version of that document. He saw the
I'm talking about
unsigned
the,
version.
I'm talking about Exhibit 2.
No, he testified he saw Exhibit 2 earlier.
No, he did not.
Well, maybe I can ask him this again. Have you seen Exhibit 2 prior to today?
Is this Exhibit 2?
Yes.
I've seen it here.
When you say here, what do you mean? Just in this hearing?
This
in
is the third time he's testified because
Right.
there's 16 co-defendants, so you gotta
Right.
clarify.
Okay, that's fair enough. So you have seen it prior to today's date,
Yes,
and you have reviewed it in the other hearings that were held in this court, the other preliminary exams.
yes.
Okay, what I'm asking you then is to take a look at Exhibit 2, and I'm directing you to the substance of Exhibit 2, which is that the Republican electors cast their votes for Trump and Pence. We can agree on that? That document does
I'm
that.
going to renew my objection.
Objection sustained.
Thank you.
He can't, give you the fundamental differences between the two documents. That's the job of the court. That's why we're here.
All right. Turning back to the clients that are here today, the defendants that are here today. You don't know when they left, correct? No. You come to learn at some point that some of the 16 defendants remained in Lansing, right?
Correct.
All right, you don't know when Mr. Grote left Lansing?
No.
You don't know when Mr. Vanderwood left Lansing? You don't know when Mr. King left Lansing? You don't know if any of these individuals participated in, I think it's the YouTube video that shows them walking to the Capitol?
No.
All right, you don't know if, with regard to Exhibit 2, my client signed any of the pages?
I wasn't present, right?
Right, you didn't actually see him sign?
Correct.
You don't know if he signed?
Correct.
You didn't see the signature page at any point prior to being in court the first time during the preliminary exams?
Correct.
All right. You don't know if my client read Exhibit 2?
I do not.
And I'm talking about not the signature page, but the substantive pages that precede it.
I do not.
You don't know if my client participated in transmitting that document to any body,
I do not.
whether it's the National Archives,
Oh.
the Michigan Senate,
I don't.
the US Senate,
I don't.
any.
Correct.
Was there, as far as you were concerned, any plan or scheme or anything with respect to the electors in terms of accomplishing any goal when they arrived at the at the headquarters on the 14th?
I don't know.
All right, do you know of anybody who would know that?
No.
All right. I don't have anything further. Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Can I get the documents?
Yes, thanks.
Cross.
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Hudson, my name is Michael Lobo. I represent American Vanderwood. Okay, so you recall Mr. Vanderwood arriving that day. He was there at the request of the Michigan Republican Party, correct?
Yes.
Effectively, your boss, Laura Cox, then chair of the Michigan Republican Party, had asked her staff, including you, to help get these folks to Lansing to participate in a ceremony.
Correct.
And it was not to be anything more than the signing of ceremonious document by Kathy Burden. That was the only thing you believed was going to be done that day.
Correct.
Now, in working with your boss, Laura Cox, you understand that she, as the Michigan Republican Party normally does, overlaps with the RNC and the Trump campaign. They work together, right?
Correct.
It's sort of a fluid relationship. In fact, you shared office spaces, correct?
Correct.
That included Sean Flynn.
Yep.
Who was an attorney for the Trump campaign, as far as you understand.
Yes.
And he was present on December 14th at the Michigan Republican Party headquarters.
Correct.
Along with other Trump campaign or Trump affiliated individuals. You're just not sure who they were. You don't know.
Right.
And then in addition to that, there was Michigan Republican Party staff, obviously including yourself. Stuart Foster was there. Henrietta Tobe.
Yep.
But not Stu Sandler and not Laura Cox.
Correct.
Mike Ambrosini, he was there.
Yes.
As you understand it, either Stu Sandler or Laura Cox drafted prosecution exhibit 28, that document that Kathy Burden signed.
I don't know who drafted it, but they sent it to me.
They would have been the people that you worked for who sent it to you and presumably were in charge of, creating this document or deciding to give it to you at all, right?
Correct.
They're the ones that were in control of what was supposed to happen in the Michigan Republican Party headquarters.
For that particular thing, yes.
As far as you know.
Correct.
You don't know exactly what their communications were with Trump campaign, do you? You were not involved in this communication.
I was not.
But you do know that they had a lot of communications with the Trump campaign about that day.
I don't know.
Laura Cox probably a better witness to testify to those things.
I don't know.
So can you describe then what it looked like on December 14th? What were the Trump campaign folks doing there if this was a Michigan Republican Party organized event?
It was a shared space. They were always working in the building.
But I understand you told Special Agent Shock that you were instructed to grab their cell phones, not allow other people in the building. Is that fair?
Non-staff members, yeah.
non-staff members, and only the electors or the replacements, but no one else.
Correct.
But the Trump campaign was still allowed in the building. Why was that?
It was a shared space, it's their office building as well.
So essentially, you, in the Michigan Republican Party, couldn't tell them what to do.
No.
And so you saw Sean Flynn in the basement when this document, prosecution exhibit 28, was presented by Kathy Burton.
No.
You don't remember.
No, I don't remember.
But they were walking around the building, and when you were done with the document that Kathy Burton signed, someone from the Trump campaign, you remember if it was Sean Flynn?
Yes.
Told you they were gonna do something else,
Yes,
but you don't know what that something else was.
Correct.
All you know is that Kathy Burton signed a document in the basement of the headquarters that day. And you saw the signed version of that document, would you recognize it?
yes.
So anyway, it's gonna look exactly like that. All right. I'm gonna hand you the signed version of prosecution exhibit 28, defense proposed exhibit A. And then witness exhibit, do you recognize that document, Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
And how do you recognize that document?
It's the same one that was just presented by the prosecution exhibit.
There, it's the same one that Stu Sandler sent you a copy of, or Laura Cox?
Yep, correct.
And do you see anyone's signature on that page that you recognize on the first page of that document?
Yes,
And how about on the second page?
yes,
And on the first page, is it Kathy Burton?
it is.
And then who signed the second page?
Henry,
Did you notarize that document?
I did.
And how do you do that?
It's stamped and signed.
And that's something that she regularly did there.
Often,
Party
yeah.
headquarters?
Yep.
Okay. That document, just like the prosecution did it, is a fair and accurate depiction of the document you received from either Stu Sandler or Laura Cox.
Yes,
At this time, I move the published offensive exhibit alpha.
Were you moving to admit it?
Sorry, moved in that.
Any objection?
No,
Defense exhibit A is admitted.
Permission to retrieve in public comment?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson, did you ever have conversations with your boss, Laura Cox, or General Counsel Stu Sandler about what the Trump campaign was asking them to do?
beforehand, no.
How about after?
Again, I informed them that there was something else going on, so late.
And that's when they told you to leave.
Right.
The last person in Michigan Republican Party to leave
I
that
don't
day?
know.
But effectively, as far as you know, this decision to sign a ceremonious document came from either Laura Cox or Stu Sandler or both of them. Correct. And that was from the leadership of the Michigan Republican Party. And then after that document was signed, that was what these electors were told they were going to do that day. We have no knowledge they were told anything else, correct?
Correct.
After that is when you learn the Trump campaign had other plans.
Correct.
And do you now know what those plans were?
Just from evidence, I presume it was to sign that.
Not outside of this court.
What's that?
Only from what you've learned here in testifying. judges.
Yes, correct.
But effectively, the Trump campaign wanted a bit more than ceremony. Is that a fair characterization?
objection, speculation.
Did you want to respond to this?
I think my question, I would rephrase and ask if that is something that Laura Cox or Stu Sandler told. Ask for effect on this.
You're gonna withdraw that question and ask if Stu Sandler and who?
Stu
Laura Cox?
Sandler and his boss Laura Cox, if they ever told him that was the Trump campaign.
I would object to that as well, as hearsay.
That would be effect on this. I want to ask him why it was important that he left and the Trump campaign took over this.
Sorry, you said you were gonna say why was it important that he left? When what?
Correct, I think it goes, so there's, when he goes to the meeting, all he knows is that there's a ceremony to be held, and they're gonna sign this document.
Correct.
Then the Trump campaign takes over, and he calls Stu Sandler, and so, or Laura Cox, I don't really remember which one, and they said, get out of it. And so I want to find out if that has anything to do with it.
It just asked why did you leave?
That's true. Objection is sustained.
So Mr. Hudson, why then did you leave?
Was ever instructed to do so.
Why did you feel it was necessary to call your bosses to tell them what was going on?
I didn't know what was happening.
You didn't know what was happening. It was also inconsistent with what you were told was going to happen that day.
Correct.
It was also inconsistent with what Kent Vanderwood was told by the Michigan Republican Party he'd be doing that day.
Objection, lack of foundation.
Did you want to respond?
Ask me, I thought that is on direct. He testified that it was part of his job to help get electors to the Capitol. He was directed by his boss.
I'm just, the reason why I'm asking you to repeat is because this right here, plus her keyboard, it drowns out your sound. Your voice is kind of low.
I apologize.
And you're actually the furthest from the court. So if you can speak a little bit louder for me.
I'm not sure where we left off, Your Honor, but
My objection.
There was
Well,
objection as to the last question about, was it?
What Kent Vanderwood was told about what would or would not happen at Republican headquarters.
And she said it was lack of foundation. And you were responding to that objection.
my understanding was that it was part of Mr. Hudson's job to help get the electors to the Lansing headquarters that day. Part of that was explaining what they were going to be doing. If I got that wrong, draw.
Okay.
I think that that would be a better question, and what did you tell Kent Vanderwood about what would happen if he did speak to Mr. Vanderwood?
Well, let's first establish if he spoke to Mr. Van.
That's what you know, Mr. Vanderwood, right?
Yeah.
And so did you speak to him before December 14th, 2020?
In general, yes, but regarding this event, I don't believe.
You don't believe so, or you don't know so?
I don't think I did.
So you don't know if you or anyone else called him to explain what's going on,
I don't remember.
but you also have no other explanation for why he didn't show up that day.
Correct.
Problem.
So, Mr. Rez, I'm gonna ask you just a couple other questions. You said that it was Kathy Burden that led this meeting, is that correct?
I wasn't present for the meeting.
Okay. But she was assigned this document.
Correct.
Were any of the other electors given ceremonial roles or told to do other things that say Kent Vanderwood was not asked to do?
Not that I'm aware of.
Do you have any knowledge of any of the electors being more involved, maybe with the Michigan Republican Party or the Trump campaign than others?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So you really don't know much about any of that, other than you were just there that day and told it to the ceremony.
Correct.
And you have no idea what Kent Vanderwood knew about it.
Correct.
And you two were friends, you've known each other for a while.
Yeah.
But you never talked to him before then, and you had no idea what he did that day.
Specifically, I don't believe it was.
So as far as you know, Kathy Burton signed that document, and he may have seen that.
I don't know.
That's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
he,
yes.
that's what he was there to do, right?
Correct.
The Michigan Republican Party asked him to come and do that, sign a ceremonious document.
Correct.
And beyond that, you have no idea if that document was switched out with something else, or if he was if he was presented with the other version that you were showing.
I do not know.
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Judge, if I may, and I apologize for this. I actually had a couple of other questions I forgot to turn to my client and ask. And I'm just asking if I could do those now before Ms. Logan. speaks. Okay, thank you. I apologize too. Mr. Hudson, did you see Mr. Grott at any point go to the Capitol?
No.
All right. Did you speak to him at any length during that
No.
day? And did he tell you at any point that he was leaving right after the meeting because he was sick while he was at the meeting?
I don't recall
Objection,
that.
hearsay.
Thank you.
So it's consistent.
Well, Judge, Mr. Grott clearly is a party opponent in this case, so.
Yeah, but yours, not your opponent, mine.
Well, yeah.
It doesn't
I don't think
apply
that-
to it. It doesn't apply that way in criminal.
I have no
Redirect?
redirect.
Okay, thank you. Maybe excused. It's 12:02. So do you have any other witnesses today?
I have one more maybe.
Who's that?
Captain Green? Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Okay, well, recess, while you all talk about that.
It would be consistent with his testimony from groups 1 and 2, and we are asking the court to incorporate those transcripts into this exam. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that we would be permitted to use the transcript testimony from groups 1 and 2 in any briefing with the court orders.
The second witness is Miriam Vincent of the National Archives and Records Administration. And essentially, we would agree that her testimony, if she were to testify in this exam, would be the same and consistent with her testimony for groups 1 and group 2, and we would incorporate by reference those transcripts into this exam.
Agreed, and that we'd be allowed to use the transcripts for any briefings with this.
Yes.
What was her name again?
Miriam Vincent. You guys aren't objecting to the exhibits, right?
No.
Because for Miriam Vincent, it was exhibit 10, which has been previously admitted in both of those exams.
Right.
And the third witness was Dan Schwager, SCHWAGER, formerly of the Office of the Secretary of the President of the Senate. And our stipulation is that were he to testify in this exam, his testimony would be consistent with his testimony from groups 1 and group 2, and we incorporate by reference the transcripts from those exams.
And same thing, we'd all be allowed to use those transcripts for briefing purposes.
And the exhibit related to Mr. Schrager was group 11, exhibit 11. And as to Captain Green, exhibit 12, which was the YouTube video.
Right.
Awesome.
Those notes that Captain Green could not identify in the documents.
Well, no, because he could, well, we'll talk about that. We don't need to make a record of that. He didn't identify the clients earlier, so. Judge Ed is consistent. The only thing I'd ask is, it looks like Ms. Logan has a list of all the exhibits. If you could just email a copy to council
Absolutely,
so that we have one, just so we're all on the same page and it makes things smoother. I
absolutely.
think things went pretty smoothly today and I'd like to continue that momentum.
I would agree.
And with that, Your Honor, the people will only have 2 witnesses tomorrow, James Renner and Special Agent Howard Shaw.
Okay. Okay, so stipulations are noted, and the transcript from those previously stipulated testimonies will be incorporated. And of course, the parties will be able to use those transcripts in their briefing. Tomorrow we'll have 2 witnesses.
Yes.
And so I give you these exhibits back for today. The defense exhibit A. Okay, thank you. Okay. Yeah, any additional matters for today's record?
No,
Just, Your Honor, if the court has now received our motion, the court, we can expect maybe a decision sometime today, just so I can let Mr. Vanderwood know. I know he has.
Pass it to you.
I don't know, but you gave me another one.
I think I might have, did I give you the motion at the bottom of that by accident?
It's possible.
Looks like I gave you my docket sheet too.
try to make it easy for you, Judge. We don't want to complicate it.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see, there was the motion to waive Mr. Vanderwood's presence for the remainder of the district court proceedings. Obviously, it's right to be present and it's right to wait. He doesn't want to be present. Well, there's an evidentiary hearing about felony charges against him. The court will grant his request and allow him to not be present.
Thank you, Your Honor. Apologize to the court for not getting that to the court.
No problem. And then Mr. King is having an issue with staying awake. And so he's gonna need to appear in person.
You're gonna appear in person for tomorrow, Judge?
Yes, because he can't stay awake. we
Could I
assume.
have a chance to talk to him about that?
Absolutely.
Text him,
Yes, if you can get him,
stay
looks like he's
awake,
getting his blood sugars up now. If you can get him
stay
to
awake,
stay awake, then
then he can stay.
absolutely.
Okay. You want me to show picture of his
I
leg
don't
and
want to
his
see a
foot,
picture of his leg.
or his foot.
I don't want to see any of his medical information. I just want, you just can't be on the Zoom like
You'll
that.
never forget it.
I
Haunt you
believe it.
forever.
I believe it.
Come on, Judge, we could set off a horn like every 15 minutes to, you know.
We're going to grab some lunch if you'd like to join us. This is my colleague.
Nice to meet you.
Yep, she's our.
Mr. King, you're all set for today.
This term, so she's working on her first appellate.
You're
brief.
muted, but I read your lips.
Is this for Thursday? This is not for Thursday. This is just one of the past cases that our attention is.
You were too close to the screen. I don't know if we can see you. You had to back up to be in the camera. That little box in the corner shows you.
Yeah, I know. I had to see your email this morning. Good. Good, okay.